various human body systems, okay, and we'll go through them sort of one at a time. And in each body system, we'll kind of talk about main function, organs of the system. We'll talk about possibly some diseases and disorders related to that body system. We'll go from there. So when we talk about the body systems, we break it into sort of 11 different human body systems. Integumentary system, which is basically hair in our outer body covering. We're not going to get into many details there. It's about all we're going to say. And then we have the rest of them. And you guys named most of them earlier on. And there is some overlap, though. Some organs of certain body systems have overlapping functions with other body systems, and so that's just something to keep in mind. So we have the skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, circulatory, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, excretory, and reproductive systems. They all work together in order to maintain, what's the word here? Learn the word how? Homeostasis. You guys heard that word before?
Yeah.
All right, it's going to be very important both in this unit and as you move further in your study of biology. Homeostasis means basically, we talked about this in your living things, keeping balanced, stable internal environment. Our bodies have certain requirements. We need to be at a certain temperature. We need a certain amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our blood. We need a certain amount of ATP and sugar and so forth. So our body's systems work to maintain that homeostasis, to keep balance. And if they are unable to do that, then it results in some sort of disease. So, to review, we have the levels of organization. We've talked about these in the past. Simplest level of organization is cells. And humans, being fairly complex vertebrates, have all of these different levels of organization. Remember, things like sponges only had a cellular level of organization. Okay? As we move through the invertebrates, some had tissues and some had organs. Humans have all of these levels of organization. So cells, which are the basic units of life. And these cells work together, they form tissues. A cluster of cells that are working together to accomplish some task is a tissue. A bunch of tissues working together at some task form an organ. A group of organs working together to complete some function are an organ system. All of our organ systems combined form an entire living human, an organism. So let's review. Cell, tissue, organ system, organism. These are the levels of organization. So this first note packet that we have is about the skeletal and muscular system. We often will talk about them combined. Sometimes it's called the skeletal muscular system, sort of as one combination, because they obviously have to work together. Okay, so start off talking about the skeletal system, the bones. You know the number?
206.
Yeah. In an adult human body, there are 206 bones. Why did I say in the adult human body? Raise your hand, please. Abby.
Because when you're born, some of your bones aren't fused
Yeah, because at birth, in an infant, there are some bones that have not yet fused together, and so they're separate. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. But in an adult human, there are 206 bones in our body, which serves multiple purposes. Some bones are important for protection of vital organs. Others are important for support and movement. So, in terms of our skeletal system and muscular system, we kind of include ligaments and tendons here as well. Bones is a type of tissue. Bone tissue is what our bones are made out of.
Bones are alive?
Yeah, bones are living tissue made of cells. They have blood vessels that supply them with blood and oxygen. Now they're calcified, so they're hard, right? But they're still living tissue. And inside of the bone, as we know, in the center of the bones is a fatty substance. It's called bone marrow. What does the bone marrow do? You know? Maybe?
Like, I think it's sort of like a shock absorber.
Well, not so much shock absorber. It's related to a different body system.
It creates white blood cells?
Yeah, it creates blood cells. Both red and white blood cells are created inside of the bones, in the bone marrow. That's why, have you ever heard of a person needing a bone marrow transplant?
No.
Sometimes a person may need to get a bone marrow transplant. A person with leukemia, for example, okay, a cancer of white blood cells, may get a bone marrow transplant to help their body produce healthy white blood cells. And so bone marrow is where blood cells are produced. Ligaments is a type of what we call connective tissue. Ligaments are tough strands of protein tissue that connect our bones together. So without these ligaments, our bones would each be separate from each other, not be really connected. These ligaments connect our bones together. They help form our joints where we move our bones. What's a ligament you may be familiar with? You probably don't know the names of any. Here?
ACL?
Yeah, the ACL. You probably have heard of an ACL or an ACL injury in an athlete. The ACL, anterior cruciate ligament, is a ligament that's found where? In your knee. This is a picture of a knee joint. That's the kneecap, the patella. And what you see here, you see the tibia down here and the fibula. And they're connected by these strands of connective tissue. These are ligaments. You see a ligament here, you see ligaments here, you see inside, sort of in the back of the knee, two ligaments that crisscross each other. Okay? The ligament inside there, that's the ACL. And it's a ligament that helps stabilize the knee joint. Okay? And so sometimes a person may injure their ACL in some sporting event or something if they get hit in the knee, if they're planting and twist at the same time, if there's sort of undue pressure on their knee joint, then they can damage it. In fact, one of the things is that females are much more likely to damage their ACL than boys are, or men are. And it has to do with differences in anatomy, and differences in the angle in which the hips connect to the femur and the rest of the knee joint. And it puts more pressure on the ACL. And that's why, especially, I mean, everybody should be aware of knee joint health, especially if you're in sports, things about strengthening muscles in your legs, doing things like balance training, agility, stable knee position. These are all things to think about, especially for girls. If you're in athletics, then it's something to think about. There's different programs of strengthening, stretching, and I guess coordination that are helpful in preventing some of those ACL injuries. So ligaments connect bones to bones. And what about tendons? Yeah? Yeah. Oh, I'll stay right. Tendons connect bones to muscle. So our muscles, they have to connect to our bones in order to move them. And they're connected by a strand of tissue called a tendon. What tendon are you probably, you maybe only know the name of a single tendon in your body.
Achilles tendon.
Emily?
Achilles.
Yeah, the Achilles tendon, the one at the back of your heel. Okay, they connect your calf muscle to your heel bone. And the tendons are what actually pull on the bones to move them. So you see back here, the calf muscle, this is the Achilles tendon.
Can you actually die if you get shot in the Achilles tendon?
No. Why is it called the Achilles? What's it named after?
Achilles.
Yeah, what happened to him?
He got shot.
You get shot
by an arrow.
You got hit with an arrow
He got
in
shot.
the heel.
That was the
By an
only
That was his
spot that-
only point of weakness,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. All right. You do need to know the name of all of these bones.
Okay.
I know you already had to memorize them in health, or you will.
That's not bad.
All right. So
Skin bone.
you need to rememorize them. The names you need are the actual names of the bones, not these common names, not shin bone, okay, or backbone. You need to know the actual terms. All right, so they're not that complicated, and many of them you probably already know. So to begin, your skull we would call the cranium. Protective bone. Again, it protects your brain. If you have one inside of your skull.
That's the easiest.
No, it isn't.
All right.
Ribs.
Oh, that's true.
Second,
Where's the funny
you
one?
might call it your collarbone. You can feel it it's very close to the surface of your skin. You can feel it down at the base of your neck, two of them. That's called the clavicle. Yeah, clavicle. A clavicle is a common fracture. Sometimes when people fall, they may fracture their clavicle. If they catch themselves on their arms, the impact can sometimes break the collarbone or clavicle. Okay, the breastbone, thick, hard bone right in the center of your chest. It's the sternum. Okay, so the sternum is again protective bone. Protecting what?
The hip bone connects.
Your heart and your lungs. Also, going along with that is the ribs. The rib cage helps protect vital internal organs. Your rib cage encloses what's called your thoracic cavity, the opening in your body that contains your heart and your lungs. Below that, what's the name of this cavity that's below that?
Stomach.
It's in there, the abdominal cavity. So thoracic cavity is up in the chest. Below that is the abdominal cavity. They're separated by muscle here called the diaphragm. All right. So in the arm, upper arm is a single bone.
Humerus.
It's humerus.
Boom. That's why it's called your funny bone.
Number 6. Okay. Your spine, your backbone are the vertebrae. Actually, a whole bunch of bones, all sort of linked together, one on top of each other.
7.
Shh. All right, so I'm going to be quiet. Your forearm is actually 2 bones. So in your forearm, you have these 2 bones. And if you sort of hold on to your wrist, you could if you hold on to your forearm and twist your wrist, you could feel these 2 bones. You start, if your palm is facing up, you could feel your radius is the thumb side bone. The ulna is the pinky side bone. But when you twist your wrist, if you kind of squeeze in your forearm, you could feel your radius start to rotate over, and it crosses over the ulna. So the one that's attached to the pinky side of your hand is the ulna, and the one attached to the thumb side of your hand is the radius. To help remember, I remember is your thumb can move in like a full circle, and a radius is part of a circle. So remember, the radius is the one attached to your thumb side of your hand.
It makes no sense.
All right, number 9, the pelvis. Okay, supports the body, allowing you to stand upright. 10, tailbone, you probably would call it.
Yeah.
Extends below the pelvis. It's called the sacrum. Yeah, it's curves in there. I mean, it comes out a little bit and then curves. It's one, you know, if you bruise or fracture your tailbone, it's really painful. One time my oldest daughter Taylor, we were sledding at the parkway like 5 or 6 years ago, and she went sledding, she went over this huge jump and she landed and she was crying. And I just said, oh, you're fine, just go back up the hill. Well, it turns out she actually fractured her sacrum.
You're the worst.
Yeah, I know, it wasn't very nice. She still reminds me of it. And now, even when we go on like a long car ride, like you drive to South Carolina, it still hurts sometimes. It's a tough one, doesn't heal, can't have a cast or anything, and it can remain painful for a while.
Wow. Yeah.
Sorry. All right,
Daddy,
in our legs, like our arms, we have a single upper leg bone, longest bone in the body, the femur.
What's the smallest bone in the body?
The sternum.
In your ear.
You should know.
In the
I should.
lower leg, in the shin area, we have two bones. The front one, sort of your shin bone, the thicker one, okay, is the tibia. Yeah, I mean, fractures of tibia and fibula are, yeah, that's somewhat common, especially in like soccer or something. Common injury. So the tibia is this front bone, the shin bone. The next one behind it doesn't rhyme with it. So people always want to say tibia and fibia. It's not though, it's fibula. And then the kneecap is the patella.
Yeah, kneecap though.
Tibia, fibia.
No, tibia, fibula.
Tibia, fibia.
I always say fibia. All right. Any questions about any of these bones? You do need to memorize them.
That's so
So we have here skeleton. You can see we didn't name obviously all 206 bones in the body, but we went through sort of the main ones. The one we didn't talk about in the back here, I don't know what that's called.
It's the
Your shoulder blade, if you reach behind, you can feel it like sticking out. Scapula, yes.
This is way too hard.
All right, let's move on here. You can do that on your own. All right, joints. So the place where two bones connect and there's movement, we call a joint. And there's 4 big categories of joints that we need to learn about. Okay? It's the hinge joint, gliding joint, ball and socket, and fixed joint. So a hinge joint, where do you hear the word hinge? From what? The door. So the hinge of this door is over here, these metal pieces, and they allow the door to move and swing, but only in one plane of motion. So this door, it swings back and forth. It has no mobility up and down or tilting forward or backward. Just swings in a single plane. Okay. And so in your body, what's a joint that uses a hinge joint?
Your arm.
No kneecap.
The one? Your elbow is a hinge joint. Your elbow is functioning properly. Your arm bends in one direction only.
One direction.
Okay, so it doesn't really move laterally. It bends vertically up and down, but if you hold the top of your arm straight, it doesn't have motion side to side at your elbow. Your knee is another example of a hinge joint. Your knee bends in a single direction up and down, and that's it. And the reason why these joints work in these ways, partially is because of the shape of the bones. The way that the ulna and radius fit in with the humerus here. You can see it's kind of a grooved area in the humerus. And then there's a sort of indentation there. And then the radius fits in that groove and allows it to just bend in one single direction. Okay, the ligaments also that bind it together allow it to move in that direction. All right, then we have a ball and socket joint, which allows for motion, a wider range of motion, sort of 360 degrees almost. And it's called a ball and socket because of the way the bones are shaped. Okay? So your hip, where your femur connects to the pelvis, is an example of a ball and socket joint. If I take off the femur of this skeleton,
How do we go 360 degrees?
okay, what you see is the top of the femur has this sort of ball area. It fits in to this socket area of the pelvis. And again, that gives a wide range of motion. So your shoulders, the other example, you can move your shoulders sort of up and down, left and right. You have a wide range of motion. The same thing, the top of the humerus has the ball, and it fits into the scapula and clavicle, and that's the socket. And so it gives a wide range of motion to those joints. You could see here a video, you could see the hip, you could see this movement, you could see the femur and how it fits into that pelvis.
The shoulder needs improvement.
Oh.
Yeah?
Okay.
Next a little different, we'll get there next. So the other type of joint, a gliding joint. A gliding joint is a joint which bones sort of are on top of each other and slide over each other. And so one example of a gliding joint would be your vertebrae. So the vertebrae that make up your backbone here, they're stacked one on top of the other. If I stretch this out, you can see these are the individual vertebrae. And in between them, you see these soft discs of cartilage. And what that allows is these bones can slide over one another so that you can twist, and each bone sort of rotates on top of the other, and you can rotate your back left and right. Same thing all the way up to your neck. Those bones are sitting all on top of each other, but they have some freedom of motion to sort of pivot around each other. That's called a gliding joint. We also have gliding joints in your wrist and in your fingers. They are different types. There's a saddle joint, a plane joint, ellipsoidal joint, but they're all types of gliding joints. You know, your wrist and your fingers are complex joints. They're all bound together with various ligaments.
What are you doing when you're cracking your fingers?
When you can get little pockets of air trapped inside of those joints, the joint capsule it's called, and by sort of flexing those joints to their sort of extremes, you basically release that little air pocket and makes a little popping sound as it comes out. And that's just something that happens. It doesn't cause arthritis, despite of what your parents do.
Oh my God! Yes! Finally, I can do it in public now.
Record it and then like send it to them.
All right. So fixed joints are joints in which there's actually bones which are fused together, but there's actually no movement. And in the cranium, for example, cranium is made of actually multiple bones which fuse together a while after birth. So in an infant, these bones are not fully fused. That's why if you know a little baby, you may know they have a soft spot on their top of their head. Okay, it's an area where the cranium hasn't fully fused. If you watch them closely and they have no hair, you can see it like moves with their heartbeat. You can see it goes up and down.
Yeah, I saw it on the floor.
What's on this guy's head?
Sorry. That's reality. All right, let's talk about fractures. So damage to the bones are called fractures, and there's various types of damage that can happen. So we'll talk about a couple of those. So fractures of broken bones. And so one fracture that is more common in young people is something called a green stick fracture. The name itself comes from, if you have like a dry piece of wood on the ground, you pick up a twig and you snap it, it just sort of snaps cleanly, right?
Yeah.
Two pieces.
Not really.
That'd be more like an adult bone. But if you take like a green piece of the branch that's still on the tree and you crack it, it doesn't like snap cleanly. What happens? It sort of breaks, but there's still fibers sort of holding it together. And that's true of sort of younger, more flexible bones that haven't fully calcified yet. They may break partially, but still remain connected by some bone tissue. So that's what's called a green stick fracture. Still fractured, there's still damage there, but it's not completely separated. Okay, then there's a simple fracture, which is basically a clean break. So where the bone has been fractured and it's a clean break, completely separate. And so this person fractured what? Fractured their femur. So this would be like a really, this would probably be very painful. The femur is probably one of the most painful bones to fracture. And so now it's offset. Okay, so we say it's displaced. So the bones of the femur, the two pieces that now are broken, are no longer aligned. And so if a person has a fracture, the first thing when they go to the doctor is the doctor has to do what? They wouldn't put a cast, so they would take this person and put a cast on them because what's the problem?
It's not lined up.
Yeah, the bones are not aligned. And so therefore they're not going to have strength there. If the bone's healed and we're not aligned, they're in a different length of their leg. They're not going to be able to walk properly. So the bone has to first be what?
Surgically.
Not necessarily surgically. It has to be set. So what that means is they have to get these two pieces of femur back aligned with each other in the proper manner. So at first, probably the doctor, if a person has a displaced fracture, the doctor would try to do it just manually, just by grabbing onto their leg and trying to manipulate the bones back into position.
Do they put you in like?
No.
So you just sit there while they're.
Yeah, and so if that's not possible, then they may have to surgically reset it. Sometimes with a bad fracture, they may have to use pins and so forth to hold the bones in place while it's healing.
I prefer that.
Man, you get hurt a lot.
So after it's set, then it can be casted. And casting it basically just immobilizes it. Generally, they'll cast the joint above the fracture and below the fracture. So if you fracture your tibia or fibula, probably they cast above your knee and below your ankle. Okay, if you fracture, your ulnar radius, they probably cast down past your wrist and up above your elbow. Sort of depends on where the fracture is. All right, a couple more. A compound fracture
That's the one.
is a fracture. Yes, Kevin Ware from, was that last year's NCAA tournament?
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so a compound fracture is when there is a simple fracture, a clean break, but also the bone protrudes through the skin and tears through the skin so that the bone is actually exposed.
Does that bleed?
Yes, it bleeds. It means like sort of that it goes around that bone in a spiral sort of way rather than just a clean side to side. All right, once the bones are set, once they're casted, the healing process actually in bones happens pretty quick.